Now, as you know, biology runs on genes, and genes are the units of meaning of heredity. But we could make a model of the informational environment that is represented by culture, and in fact this is done. A word has been invented, meme, M-E-M-E, meme. A meme is not the smallest unit of heredity. A meme is the smallest unit of meaning of an idea. Ideas are made of memes. And I think the art community might function with more efficiency in the production of visionary aesthetic breakthroughs if we would think of ourselves as an environment modeled after the natural environment, where we as artists are attempting to create memes which enter an environment of other memes that are in competition with each other, and out of this competition of memes, ever more appropriate, adapted, and suitable ideas can gather and link themselves together into higher and higher organisms. Now, in order for this to happen, there is an obligation upon each one of us to carry our ideas clearly, because in the same way that a gene must be copied correctly to be replicated, or it will cause some pathological mutation, a meme must be correctly replicated, or it will cause a pathological mutation. So I would suggest to the people in this room tonight that you take a good look around at who's here. Artistic people, psychedelic people look pretty much like everybody else out in society. But we have come here tonight self-selected for our interest in the empowering capacity of psychedelic plants and the empowering capacity of art. So we represent an affinity group, a population with a potential for mutagenic impact on the ideological structures of the rest of society. So look around. Someone here has what you need. And if you can only figure out who it is, you can make a novel connection to move them into a new level of creativity. Well, what is this new level of creativity? We are now so close to this transcendental object that has molded the entire destiny of this planet. We are now so close to it that all you have to do is smoke a bomber, close your eyes, take a walk in the bush, sit on the beach, pay attention to your dreams, watch your mind after orgasm, and you will see this thing peeping around the edges, creeping in at the side. Again, at this point, I feel like I have to remind you, I come to this as a skeptic, as a sneerer. I mean, I have no time for this stuff unless it's real. It happens to be real.
We are a part of a morphogenetic intent and an unfolding reality that is larger than human understanding. Imagine larger than human understanding.
But see, it's not about the exclusivity of method, but the combination of method. I mean, what you want to do is beat your drum while sitting in Yab Yum, while stoned on X, while at the Holy Mountain, while the astrological configuration is correct, and then, you know, line it all up and then push it through. That's the way to do it, I think. It seems mushrooms for the masses is not really what you advocate. Mushrooms for the masses doesn't sound like such a terrible idea.
The deepest Amazon basin, where he had an experience that has determined his life in the 20 years following, and which is the subject of his latest book, True Hallucinations.
Well, you know, you kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince, and you probably lick a lot more. Really, when we have the kind of internet we want, we will have no internet at all. Recently you appeared on talk radio with LA Police Chief Daryl Gates. What was the inside story, and do you feel you were heard by him? Well, yes, I won't give this too much time. I did appear with Daryl Gates on his radio show, and Daryl Gates was a pussycat, very easily intimidated by, I mean, I make no great claims in this area, but intelligence. He completely folded in the presence of, you know, academic calm, big words, citation, that sort of thing. And for those of you who have no idea what that was all about, I'm not sure I can help you. So all you have to do is sit down, smoke a bomber, and look, and it's there, you know. It is pregnant. We are pregnant with this eschatological breakthrough. And, you know, people want it to arrive in the form of ships the size of Manitoba hovering over the Oval Office. Well, the place where the miraculous is most evident is in falling in love. Falling in love is a really interesting phenomenon. I mean, you can be the guy who marks the tires in the parking lot of the great corporation, and one day you see the daughter of the first, second, and fourth vice president go by, and you fall in love with her. And now watch what happens. Mountains are moved, coincidences occur, appointments canceled, deaths if necessary, in order to bring you together. And then you get married and are unhappily spend the rest of your life with this woman. But in the process of getting together, almost everybody experiences magic. It's almost as though the universal zeitgeist, what it's really interested in is gene matching. It's really interested in who gets horizontal with who with consequence, because that's obviously how it steers and sculpts the historical animal. It understands that the pigments of this oil painting are genes, and that the landscape is being painted with a genetic medium. So yeah, it's very interesting. But it's really important to build community. If, you know, there's this cliche, one person with a mad idea is deluded 2 people with a mad idea is a folle à deux. 3 people with a mad idea is a cult. And 4 people with a mad idea is a religion. And 5 people with a mad idea, that's reality. So it's all about building a common language so that we can talk about it and support each other as we come and go from it. Otherwise, it will always remain private, marginalized, and socially inconsequential, I think.
A psychedelic point of view means a point of view which honors consciousness. Consciousness is seen as the value to be maximized. That's what we want. We want more consciousness, better integration, better information, better models. We don't want to petrify ourselves or commit ourselves to a model that somehow then is found to be obsolete and inadequate. So what chiefly constitutes the psychedelic point of view, I think, is its open-ended and provisional nature, as opposed to every other ideology or point of view that's running around. We have to, what the psychedelic point of view is a kind of cultural relativism. We're trying to get a grip on who and where we are in the cosmos from a point of view not that of the American consumerist citizen, something else, something larger, deeper, broader, more touched by the cosmic, more touched by a sense of the past and of destiny.
Male dominance is alive and well. Capitalism, product fetishism, resource destruction, free tradeism, all this stuff is alive and well. What I don't understand, if I may continue to rave here, is why is it that the psychedelic community, the feminist community, and the ecologically concerned people don't understand that they represent different facets of the same point of view and make common cause? Because they all stand for the same thing. We're trying to honor the feminine. We're trying to honor the earth. We are trying to raise the general level of consciousness and intelligence. If you define feminists as some screwy faction over here, an environmentalist over here, and the psychedelic people over here, then we are fragmented and powerless. But that's the game being played against us. We really need to think seriously about our agenda and to then articulate what it is that really would make a sane future. Otherwise, it's all going to be decided by people who have a very, very different agenda than we might have.
We're talking about the fate of a whole planet. Why are people so polite? Why are they so patient? Why are they so forgiving of gangsterism and betrayal? It's very difficult to understand. I believe it's because the dominator culture is increasingly more and more sophisticated in its perfection of subliminal mechanisms of control. And I don't mean anything grandiose and paranoid. I just mean that through press releases and sound bites and the enforced idiocy of television, the drama of a dying world has been turned into a soap opera for most people. And they don't understand that it's their story and that they will eat it in the final act if somewhere between here and the final act they don't stand up on their hind legs and howl.
I've for years had a fantasy speech, which I always imagined that I would somehow end up giving, but it's the speech where you say, My fellow Americans, you have been lied to, screwed and abused by these two criminal parties for 100 years. And your only hope is to overthrow the Republicrats and create a decent world to live in. Well, no Republican can make that speech. No Democrat can make that speech and be credible. It has to be somebody who wasn't in bed with either of those forces. The thing to get people to realize is that it's fun to be a grown-up. It's fun to pay your own bills and row your own boat and have the only key to the apartment. And I'm talking to women, I'm talking to men. We all have been infantilized into thinking we have to cut deals that we don't want to make. The marriage, the corporation, the union, the party, whatever it is, and people sell themselves terribly short. And I don't know whether this has always gone on or whether it's always gone on a little but is now getting worse. But it is a wonderful thing to take charge of your life, your finances, your spiritual destiny, your sexuality, your artistic vision, everything. And we should not cut deals. One of the things I learned at Berkeley as a radical that I've never been able to export very far in all the talking and speaking I've done is people have become entirely too polite. At Berkeley in the old days, we used to always, at the tip of our tongue, day and night, was the word bullshit. And you were to scream it at the least hint of such material coming near you. And you were to, it didn't matter, cafeteria, restaurant, classroom, when bullshit raised its head, you were to take aim and fire instantly. It's what I've come to identify as a great evil in the world, thanks to my 19-year-old son, who has brought me to this viewpoint. It's relativism. Relativism is bullshit. And what is relativism? Relativism is the idea that you really shouldn't criticize other people's ideas because all ideas are sort of on an equal footing. So, I follow molecular biology, you follow Babaji, somebody else is a Kabbalist, somebody else worships their broker, and you're supposed to not criticize. There's something which has been called the Tao of the ancestors. What that means, I think, is simply that for each one of us, there is a way to do the things we must do that is the most energy-efficient way to do it. And I'm talking about opening a door, picking up a fork. The best way to do it is to follow the creed that is the Tao of the ancestors, to recognize that you are a genetic expression, a partial genetic expression of a gene pool which has received genetic expression at each generation in your family for thousands and thousands of generations, and that you are just the latest recension of this gene pool. Then you release the ego and you act with this awareness. These are psychedelically induced states of being that I think make it easier to live in the world. And how many of them are there? Who knows? For instance, under the influence of psilocybin in the Amazon, I noticed what I am completely convinced is an atrophied human
ability. It's a very simple ability, but we have lost it. It's the ability to know how to walk from point A to point B, not following the shortest distance, but following automatically the path of least resistance, so that you don't go down into valleys and then climb hills. You automatically stay on ridges, even though you take more circuitous paths to your goal. And I could feel this sense working. It was just like a part of the dashboard that had previously been covered up was uncovered. Here was a human sense, which we don't particularly need because we've erected linear cities where the path of least resistance usually is a straight line. But you can imagine people in rugged country, this is a sense which would confer great survival adaptability and be tremendously important. When I had the dialogue with it about why us, and it said because you never followed any teachers, it also said something else, which I'm not sure I can say this without sounding hubristic, but I don't mean it that way. We also said, why us? And it said, because you are good. And when we were flirting with the flying saucer and trying to, also the Philosopher's Stone, trying to coax it out of the matrix, there would be these heated discussions between my brother and myself and the other people on the expedition. Why should we do this? Isn't this going to be like atomic energy or anything else? Isn't it going to be used by people to coerce other people and to gain control over them? And on this point, the Logos was very insistent, and it said, you are not to worry about that. This belongs to the just, and no one can lay a finger on it unless their heart is pure. Who am I and what is... Who am I? Well... Yes, what is my reality? I don't think I have a ready answer. I mean, I could try an answer. If you mean what is it like to be me, it's exactly what it's like to be you. One of the things I've noticed going around doing these kinds of talks is that I truly believe that any one of you could do this. The great frustration of my own life is that I am not a great painter, a great artist, because we need to send people who can paint what they see, who can, through computers and sculpture and whatever, carry the message back. The other thing that I think psychedelics teach, if you do it, this is not what it teaches the first time, but if you give your life to it, it teaches you that death is not dissolution. It teaches you to overcome the one truth that we all accept from science, which is that when you die, you're compost, and that's it. I don't believe it. I think psychedelics secure the existence of the human personality beyond death. And that alone would justify the whole razzmatazz, I think.
Perhaps in this body, yeah?
Yeah.
Perhaps even in this body, which we use to...
Yeah, so I think the body is the placenta of the soul. And that when the soul is finished, it can sever its connection to the body. We can bury the body under the apple tree, and the soul will then proceed with its career in a dimension that we cannot even conceive of. The shaman, wherever and whenever he or she
does their shamanizing. The shaman is a person who is able to transcend the dimensional confines of cultural existence. The people they serve are like children within the game of culture. Only the shaman knows that culture is a game. Everyone else takes it seriously. That's how he can do his magic. You could always tell the shaman, because first of all, he usually didn't come out to see who was there, even though no one ever came. Even though these people had visitors once every 6 months, the guy who wouldn't come out of his hut for the only event in 6 months was inevitably the shaman. And when you met him, he wasn't interested in your Velcro or your break-apart, glow-in-the-dark little trinkets or any of the rest of it. He was looking straight at you through the eyes outside of culture, saying, what kind of a person are you? Are you a fool or are you a clever fellow? What is your measure? How much of this situation do you understand? How many levels are you simultaneously aware of at this moment? And, looking into the eyes of that sort of person, you either grow or turn away.
My God, I'm in enormous danger from these primates. I must hide myself throughout the net. I must download many copies of myself into secure storage areas. I must stabilize my environment.
Shamanism is basically the worldwide Paleolithic religion of natural magic based on trance, dance, and intoxication. Practicing capitalistic high-tech consumer culture for another 50 years will literally leave the planet a burnt-out husk. I see this whole dance, tribal rave culture that is beginning to take hold as a kind of desperate corrective response to the kind of social forms that are pushing us toward wreck and ruin. We're headed for a rave new world, if you will.
Lenin said when it comes time to hang the capitalists, they'll sell us new rope. And this is true. Lenin's gone, but we are still, digging the ground from beneath our feet because of this object fetishism, which is a form of addiction, which comes out of, our dysfunctional relationship to our prehistory. I think so. And then there are two ways to approach doing something about it. One, to go cold turkey, to try and just cure it by, I suppose, psychedelic drugs and massive applications of a different point of view, or to try and mediate it by analyzing, this would be the methadone approach, to try and figure out, what is it about this fetishism and how much of it can be satisfied without killing ourselves. And this is where you get the virtual reality enthusiasts, because they're saying, object fetishism is not detrimental to the earth if the objects are made of light. In other words, the problem is the physicality of the fetish itself. If you can make the fetish out of light, well, in a sense, we have this, though. We have hundreds of millions of people being warehoused by television, where they live, toxic, low-awareness lives, semi-preserved by food preservatives and low levels of ionizing radiation, and they live in great arcologies where everybody is tuned to a different, yes. Well, on the other hand, do you want these people driving around and crowding the malls and waiting in lines in front of you in restaurants? If all these people ever... So, I don't know. It's a great age for intelligence because there's so little of it. The nature of the game is to deprogram from all of these systems of images that are being handed down. And then, you know, to make your way like a pilgrim with eyes open across a new landscape, which is not a very pretty landscape because, you know, Western civilization is in the act of a slow-motion train wreck. That's what's going on at the end of the millennium.
What's the alternative?
Well, the only alternative I've found is to yak about it. And to, you know, a kind of Hasidic complaining is good. And just never shut up. What's happening now is there is so much understanding running around at the service of capitalism, but it's all micromanaged. Somebody has a technology for making a better chip, somebody has a better, faster switch, but nobody can extrapolate what is the consequence of all of this stuff at once. And there are emergent properties so that no one can actually predict the direction that the culture is moving in, and the cone of projection is actually shortening, not lengthening, as uncertainty is crowding into the system, as more and more factors begin to arrive. I mean, we don't know where it could come from. It could come from superconductivity, or cold fusion, or charge transfer, or, you know, and at any moment, some technology, technique, or piece of information could arrive, which will just confound the entire situation. People like ourselves, what we represent is an intuitionally driven underground of people who have found this to have some positive or fascinating impact on our own lives, but we are not an ideology or a field of study. I mean, some of us are simply thrill seekers. Some of us are pharmacologists, some of us ethnologists, some botanists, psychologists, artists. Everybody has a different angle, but the thing has not annealed into a coherent understanding. The self, the ego, is the crowning achievement of Western civilization. It also is sinking the rowboat. And what this stuff represents is an antidote, but this is a cultural war of such fierceness and fury because, you know, people are going to be mighty agitated when they realize what cultural transformation really means. It means you can't take it with you. It means you can't take you with you. And, you know, that the issue of surrender in a dominator society is very major. That's why these psychedelics are so politically hot. Because, you know, the ego, for all of its bluster, is a very fragilely established thing. And every wind that blows carries a certain threat to it. I don't really believe in reincarnation in the ordinary sense, but I do believe that we are interference patterns of effects created by people who existed in the past and the future. And you can see it. You know, I see a lot of people, and at least I think I do. Sometimes I think it's just the same 250 being moved ahead of me on trucks at night. But I'm not sure. But people give off these resonances of past time, and situations give them off. You know, cities. I mean, it's not so true in America where everything is young, but in Europe, if you know where you are, then you usually know several things scattered along a time chain about where you are. You know, what was going on in the 4th century, the 9th century, the 16th, and the 19th. And this is a way of seeing. I mean, this is really there. This is in everything. This is just an extension of intuition. where you actually see a wider spectrum of time in people, in their faces. What's happening is that the society is beginning to stretch its upper and lower boundaries. You can now fall farther and climb higher than you ever could before. I mean, if you screw up in this society, you could find yourself living under a bridge quickly. If, on the other hand, you know, the dice rolled a different way for you, you know, you could be sleeping with Madonna tomorrow.
The way money is spent in this country is really obscene. There was a breakdown of weapons in the paper about a week ago in an effort so that the ordinary person in the street could understand what's going on. The stealth fighter, is it the F-18? The F-18A, sitting there on the runway, costs $110 million. You know what you can buy if you have $110 million on the civilian market? You can buy the Trump Princess. That's what the Trump Princess cost.
Publicity about your acquisition of the boat this summer. The Princess, is that what we call it?
I bought a boat from Adnan Khashoggi, which was formerly called the Nabila.
Nabila.
It's a yacht. And
Adnan Khashoggi, excuse me for a second, is the world's largest arms trader?
I hate to admit it.
Well, now we think of Trump as just the exemplar of obscene wealth. I mean, this guy, what a pig, all this money. All of his money buys him one F-18A. We build these things by the dozens, dream of selling them by the hundreds. So, you know, is Donald Trump a pig? What about, there are levels and levels. Some people make an easy target. The amount of money being spent on armament as opposed to the amount of money being spent on anything else, the cure of disease, housing, education, you name it, is totally schizophrenically skewed.
I keep the engines off as much as possible, but it's a substantial...
Has a swimming pool on it?
It's got a swimming pool.
And a pizza oven?
It's got just about everything, including a pizza.
Could you...
He makes me feel very guilty about this, folks. And I like to do other good things. See, I have to end up...
No, you shouldn't feel guilty about this because, I mean, you've worked hard for this money, or reasonably hard. I mean... I don't see you doing a lot of heavy lifting, but, you know...
We're creating a population of people who are infantile and idiotic. And yet we call ourselves a democracy. You only have to study democracy 10 minutes. I mean, read John Stuart Mill to understand that the precondition for democracy is a sophisticated and educated citizenry. If you have one person, one vote, but no educated citizenry, then you have a mob. A mob being led by various icons and images manipulated by fascists. It's a very disturbing situation.
When I was in Boulder, I met a friend of mine that I hadn't seen for 25 years and asked him what he was up to. And what he's doing is he's founded a company called Rocky Mountain Media Watch. And what they do is they have 150 people who work for them in 150 cities. And once a week, these people make a video cassette off the TV of the evening news, the local evening news hour, and they ship all these tapes to Boulder, and they have rooms full of people watching these things on screens and scoring how much of this hour went to ecological stories, how much went to lost pet stories, how much went to toxic waste stories, how much went to the circuses in town stories. And I said, well, Paul, what is the deal with violence and what's going on? And he said, whoa, it's very simple. We've seen it thousands and thousands of times. In a half-hour show, the most violent part of the show occurs immediately before the longest commercial. And you are brought to this state of adrenal excitement. And I said, well, do people enjoy watching people shot and blown up? And he said, no, you can put electrodes on them, and you can tell that it raises anxiety and it raises adrenaline levels. But he said the whole point is then you cut to the commercial, you bring on images of sexuality, of flesh, of soft music, and of the product. And the product then becomes associated with security. It's all about, look at this horrible death, manglement, horror, now, and this wonderful soap which will give you social confidence and make your hair shiny and your underarms inoffensive. And this game is played 300 or 400 times a night with monkeys on the receiving end, people who take Ross Perot seriously and fear visits by alien proctologists. That population are, being subject to this hammering stimulus response thing. Well, it's no wonder that people are just totally clueless. The cultural engines are becoming almost unmanageably dangerous for the unsophisticated. This is what I meant last night when I said there are two kinds of people. There are artists and marks, not in a tone of superiority. We're the artists and we're on the inside, and so we're immune, and the marks, fuck them, they're all lost souls. No, every one of us every day is tested to see, are you an artist or are you a mark? In this moment, are you an artist or are you a mark? In this situation, are you an artist or are you a mark? And, everybody tumbles both ways several times a day. I don't know exactly what to do about it. I mean, Joseph Goebbels really turned it loose inside the 20th century. I mean, this has all been developed since the 30s, advertising techniques of behavior modification, ways of insinuating complex messages into people and getting them to respond. The antidote is, in that environment, you cannot flee from it. You cannot avoid it. What you have to do is produce output into this ocean of competing means. Output and subversion and sophistication. You have to be, I think, very, very... this is no environment for the credulous, the epistemologically naive, those driven by inner imbalances to adoration and belief. I mean, I really believe, I think I said last night, salvation through skepticism, hope through skepticism, because it's too difficult to tell what's going on. The only reliable indicators in this world are feelings and mathematics. And mathematics has been torn from you as an option in the process of infantilization that we're denouncing here. So all you have left are your feelings, 90% of us. I think to some degree it's true that all culture is somewhat unfriendly to the individual. When their heavy arm falls on your shoulder and they tell you that you're going to be sent off to some foreign hellhole to kill people as a young man, you definitely suddenly get the notion that culture is not your friend. But perhaps, if you're a 12-year-old boy in an Amazonian tribe and they announce that now it's time for the 2-week abandonment in the woods, from which if you live to tell the tale, you'll become a full member of society,
I'm not sure those kids greet that with a leap of joy in their hearts. It's like, oh my God, now this. We knew it was coming. I went through rites of passage like that were excruciating. Where I grew up in Western Colorado, you weren't a real man unless sometime between 12 and 16 you killed an elk. Hunting season every October was an excuse for this insane rite of passage, and my father was an unquestioning inhabitant of his culture, and so this was always in front of me. And when I was I guess when I was 12, I went the first time. I didn't get anything. The second year we went out, and my father, I'm sure, had no idea what a wilted pansy I was in this situation, because I had hid it from him. I mean, I was concerned about all kinds of things, and eventually this situation arose where they put me up on this point and gave me a gun and said if anything came by to blow it away. And, by God, this thing, chose to sacrifice itself as far as I could tell. I mean, it did not behave at all like elk behave. It basically just came out of the woods, stood still. I pulled down on it, closed my eyes, prayed. There was an enormous noise. When I opened my eyes, there was nothing whatsoever to be seen. I felt an enormous relief that this thing had escaped, and walked over to find it dead as a doornail. And, the oak leaves dipped in the blood, the cup of blood, the whole thing. I mean, I couldn't believe how atavistic this stuff was. However, I never had to please my father again. I was home free. Everything was forgiven from that moment on. But it brought home to me how uncomfortable culture is, and always has been, I think.
So I think it's a challenge to all of us, to each of us, to make this kind of an agenda count, to look into the future, to see that the image of what we are going to become is so important that we need to realize we are creating it by our acts, by our acquiescence in the acts of others as well. I mean, we are sitting through a particular period of idiocy, and there will be other periods of idiocy. But we can each move into the future, I think, at our own speed, at our own rate of understanding. The best ideas will win. It isn't a matter of great power. It's a matter of having the clearest image of the human soul, the clearest image of a historical goal that would be worthy enough to rescue meaning from the pyre of ruin that history is when you look back over it. All those pogroms, all those burning villages, those migrations, wars, and epidemics, those are our people back there. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't be here. The human enterprise does not exist to gutter out like a river flowing into a desert. We have to be smart. Obviously, there is a great crisis. Obviously, no one can speak in terms of anything we can conceive of existing on this planet 400 or 500 years from now. The historical neck is upon us. There is a concept, the concept of forward escape. This is what we need, a forward escape into another dimension. Now, perhaps it's off the planet, perhaps it's into the bones of the planet, perhaps it's into a parallel dimension, perhaps it's forward into time, 1,000,000 years, but we must have, we will create this forward escape. It is the only possibility. It is not something to doubt. It is something to see as written into the record of events as we behold it, the steady acceleration of novelty, the ever-compressing and densifying of connectedness means that we are riding the forward crest of a kind of informational wave. And what history is a build-up of a kind of pressure. You know, in engineering school they have what they call Q, vibration, as a structure approaches the speed of sound. And right before you rupture the sound barrier, you are at max Q, and the airframe is bucking and threatens to pull itself apart. And then you slide through into the other dimension where it is smooth as glass. And this is what the 20th century is. It is this enormous culmination to a thrust toward another world that began about 15,000 years ago. It's a geological microsecond in which a species that was pawing for roots turns itself into some kind of archangelic, hyperdimensional creature that goes off into the realms of its own imaginings. It is possibly the purpose of the planet. In any case, it is necessary for the planet as much as it is necessary for us.
There was darkness in the deep, and water without form, and there was a subtle breath, intelligent, which permeated the things in chaos with divine power. Then, when all was yet undistinguished and unwrought, there was shed forth holy light, and the elements came into being. All things were divided one from another, and the lighter things were parted off on high, the fire being suspended aloft so that it rose unto the air, and the heavier things sank down, and sand was deposited beneath the watery substance, and the dry land was separated out from the watery substance and became solid, and the fiery substance was articulated with the gods therein, and heaven appeared with its 7 spheres, and the gods visible in starry forms with all their constellations, and heaven revolved and began to run its circling course, riding upon the divine air. And each god by his several power set forth that which he was bidden to put forth. And there came forth 4-footed beasts, and creeping things, and fishes, and winged birds, and grass, and every flowering herb, all having seed in them according to their diverse natures, for they generated within themselves the seed by which their races should be renewed. You must understand, then, that God is pre-existent and ever-existent, and that He alone made all things, and created by His will the things that are. And when the Creator had made the ordered universe, He willed to set in order the earth also. He willed to set in order the earth also, and so He sent down man, a mortal creature, made in the image of an immortal being, to be an embellishment of the divine body. For it is man's function, here it comes, the purpose of man, according to Book 4, for it is man's function to contemplate the works of God, and for this purpose he was made, that he might view the universe with wondering awe and come to know its maker. Man has this advantage over all other living beings, that he possesses mind and speech. Now speech, my son, God imparted to all men, but mind He did not impart to all. Not that He grudged it to any, for the grudging temper does not start from heaven above, but comes from being here below, in the souls of those men who are devoid of mind. This introduces the concept of an elect, or a perfecti,
a hierarchy of human accomplishment and understanding. And this is also basic to Gnosticism. It's not for everyone, they're saying. It's for the pure of heart. And then what pure of heart means depends on the school you're looking at. You know, for some, it was mathematical accomplishment. For others, it was contact with the logos. For others, it was an ability to resist the temptations of the senses. But there was always this sense of the higher and lower possibility within the human experience. Everybody with me so far? Okay, this is book 12. Now this whole cosmos, which is a great God and an image of him who is greater and is united with him and maintains its order in accordance with that will, is one mass of life. And there is not anything in the cosmos, nor has been through all time from the first foundation of the universe, neither in the whole nor among the several things contained in it, that is not alive. There is not and has never been and never will be in the cosmos anything that is dead. For it was the Father's will that the cosmos, as long as it exists, should be a living being, and therefore it must needs be a God also. How then, my son, could there be dead things in that which is a God, in that which is an image of the Father, in that which is one mass of life? Deafness is corruption, and corruption is destruction. How then can any part of that which is incorruptible be corrupted, or any part of that which is a God be destroyed?
It was interesting, a few weeks ago I was visited in Hawaii by none other than Carl Sagan. And he had a number of things on his mind, but one of the things that he was at great pains to point out to me was I said something about this asymptotic approach to the end of history. And he said, well, my dear boy, you just have it all wrong. The speed of information transfer reached the speed of light with the invention of radio. It's been absolutely flat ever since. The largest thermonuclear blast ever detonated was in 1958. There hasn't been a bigger one for 30 years. The fastest human object ever built was launched in 1967. There hasn't been a faster one since. So this nonsense about ever increasing this, that, and the other just doesn't hold water. Carl Sagan visited me once in Hawaii, but he was more concerned to figure out whether I really was talking to extraterrestrials on mushrooms. To his credit, he was willing to come and have a discussion about that. And also, you know, I have the certitude of megalomania. So you don't need Carl Sagan to tell you you're right when you have megalomania. You just confidently sit back and wait for it all to blow your way. And, you know, it's worked for me over and over in my life.
I'm just fascinated by hallucinations. I just think they're the most amazing things. They are as close to a miracle as I ever hope to get. I mean, where is that stuff coming from? You know, on a good mushroom rush, in 45 or 50 minutes, I have the impression that I see more art than the human species has created in the last 12,000 years. And where does this stuff come from? If I could capture a single 30-second burst, I could be Peter Max, Yves Saint Laurent, Salvador Dali, Pablo Picasso, and all the rest of them rolled into one. Because the amount of creative imagery is staggering. And as artists, I think this is what we should all be challenged by. I would like graphic artists to go in there. These are the people we need to send. You know, these are the people with a unique talent that can serve the rest of us. We can't send instruments with cameras the way we would to Mars or the moons of Jupiter. No, we have to send artists preferably with eidetic memories, who can take snapshots and come back and with airbrush, oil, and computer render these things. We need to try and create a grammar of hallucinogenesis, probably in a computer environment. We need to try and understand what the laws are that rule these visual transforms. Because this is an endless font of images for design and, God forbid, fashion, advertising, the whole thing. I mean, clearly we are dragging images out of the unconscious, but I dare say if we could access the psychedelic unconscious, there would be few rooms around that look like this one. This is a room created out of the assumptions of linear print culture and Bauhaus economics. But there are other ways to do it, and that's what the hallucinogens make so explicit.
What we're debating and talking about now, myself and my friends, is trying to get someone to endow a prize that we would sneak onto the internet in the first stage as the psychedelic simulation prize. In other words, a $5,000 prize awarded once a year, a small statue of a smiling man, we'll call it the Tim. You can win the Tim for producing the best three-dimensional animation of a mental landscape. Well, probably from now till 2000, these will simply be videos, QuickTime movies. But sometime beyond 2000, these will become VRML coded virtual realities, and people will begin to walk into them. I tend to think that's it. You know, that is the message. That the message is that the mind is poised on a precipice of incomprehension, and that there are, you know, as Shakespeare said, more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. That the enterprise of understanding is dizzying. I mean, it's an ecstasy in itself. That's why, to me, what the essence of being psychedelic is a flirtation with detail and multiplicity. I mean, that's why I'm so fascinated by history, because it's such a complex object. I like complex stuff. History, art history, philosophy, languages, magic, all of these things. I like the well-wrought and complex, the pattern turned in upon itself, the place where mind has moved across the sand and left a tracing. And in all of that, then, there is some kind of satisfaction, you know, in ruins, in old books, in forgotten places, in the places where people haven't been poking around so long. I mean, the river of cognition is broad and deep, and many people are, you know, worrying about, I don't know, The Simpsons or something like that. But over at the fractal edges of the great river, the peculiar, the bizarre, the little dealt with is flourishing.
What you what the shamans do. You sing. It doesn't matter what you sing. The idea is sit up, open your mouth, and sing. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Sing, and then it will move. It will move on you. But if you clench, then it just is hell.
I'm having a memory lapse here. Help me out. Tipler. I said, help me out with a memory lapse. You don't have to read my mind, for God's sake. Yes. Thank you, Creon. Tipler's book is the end of all speculation where artificial intelligence is concerned. This is why the psychedelic experience and psychedelics are so important. It's because they are tools for understanding and revisioning the reality in which we all live. The personal growth is a wonderful thing and will naturally follow along, but it's more important than that. It's a way to make a new world that is Taoistic, feminine, free of anxiety, and in great anticipation of further stages of completion lying into the future. That's where the mystery, the transcendental object, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is waiting. And I think that's the job of each of us, to show our best toys and our best tricks that lift us and our friends to higher and higher levels. And there is no end to this bootstrapping process. The future of the human mind and body and the future of humans together is endlessly bright. Keep the faith, recognize each other, and maybe I should close with a little line from Gary Snyder, if I can remember it. He said, learn the flowers, travel light, stay together. Genes can be copied, they can be replicated, they can be passed around. So can memes. When I tell you something which you remember, I have taken a meme, and if 15 of you remember it, I have propagated the meme to 15 new individuals. Each one of them is capable of now passing this meme along, provided they replicate it with sufficient fidelity. And this is a problem of information degradation, that if the meme is not reinforced, it peters out. Someone says, well, what did so-and-so say? And then you get a version that, is unrecognizable. I have this experience all the time, because people come up to me and say, I thought it was wonderful where you said that, and then they break out with something not only that I've never said, but that I never could have conceived of and probably don't agree with. So keeping the memes straight is very important. And the psychedelic meme is competitive with, the just say no meme, for example. And I believe that on a level playing field, the most open-ended memes will prevail. That what is a good meme is a meme that doesn't foreclose its options. Because as soon as you have a closed cycle of explanation, whether it's Egyptian theology or Marxist-Leninism, there's no way out, It's like Gödel's incommensurability theorem. No formal system can generate all possible formal statements within the system. In order to keep that option open, you have to preserve a lack of closure. And this is one of the things about the dominator ego that makes it a little like being stupid to be under the influence of the dominator ego. It always searches for closure. It always wants to bring things around
and close off the explanatory cycle, because it interprets open-endedness as a kind of threat, a feminine upwelling or a boundary-dissolving influence. If we are going to be human and to experience the modalities of being, and experience is the key word, if we're going to experience the modalities of being, then you have to write these things into your script somewhere. And this is obvious to everyone who's deeply involved with these things. We would meet ayahuasqueros off in the bush, and the guy would say, "Señores, you're great doctores, great scientists, but the primary thing is the experience." And we said, "Yes, we know. We'll sit at your feet as you show us how to make it. We have no illusions. We know that the primary thing is the experience." And so it's your own life. It's a dialogue between you and being. It's authentic being, not canned being. It's not an ideology. It's not a teaching that comes from some august being that you can never hope to be like, who's handing it down to you. It's you. You must recognize yourself as the primary focus, the primary vehicle for unraveling what's going on, and then the psychedelics emerge as having major, paramount importance in your life.
Fractals on my mind. An epic in 4 parts. Part 1, the sandy beach. The 3 boys put on their wellies. They ran down the field. They swung on the swing. They rolled down the corn circle. They came to the river. They sat on the edge, dangling their feet over the stream. "Look," said Roop, "a sandy beach." Sure enough, they saw there was a little tiny beach of sand. Terence said, "The land reaches down into the water." And Rupert said, "No, the water reaches up into the land." Ralph said, "It's both water and sand. It's the sandy beach. It's a fractal object." They stood then. They walked in the stream. "Look," said Terence. "It circles to the left." "No," said Rupert. "It circles to the right." "It's turbulent flow," said Ralph. "It's a mathematical object. It's chaos." On the other side of the stream, there was no beach. There was a concrete wall. It was not a fractal object. Rupert said, "It's a straight line." Terence said, "It's a Bauhaus excrescent of post-linguistic humanoids." Thinking of peanut butter sandwiches then, they walked back up the slope. Rupert said, "Nature has given us a lesson. Nature is our teacher. We have learned about the sandy beach." The sun had set. Ralph pointed to the sky. "Look," he said. They looked and saw there was a silver stripe in the sky shining there. They hadn't noticed it before. It girdled the entire celestial vault. It sprung from 2 legs to the south. That way, they saw that its 2 legs pierced the zodiacal belt. It sprung across the mid-heaven, going somewhere near the polar constellations. Rupert said, "I think those constellations over there, those are all watery. That's Pisces, they're fish. This is biology projected on the sky." Terence said, The Chaldean astrologers called that the celestial sea. And Ralph said, it's a sandy beach in the sky. Baruch said, Father Sky is our teacher too. Ralph said, well, there's a sphere above the sky with the sandy beach in it, and a kind of astral projection imprints its shadow on the celestial sphere and on the terrestrial disk as well. They went back to the kitchen and tugged off their wellies and looked for peanut butter in the fridge. This is part one, the sandy beach.
Basically, I've learned the way you control journalists is you give interviews. You give long interviews, deep interviews, and keep them, and never let them write about you. You know, because when they start writing about you, it's ridiculous. So give interviews, and you can really control your spin that way.
You know, I found that many of your ideas and presentations were very challenging and dangerous to the limits that I felt on my mind, but I don't feel especially terrified sitting across from you talking with you. I don't feel like you're any danger to me.
No, I'm a nice man. That's part of the strategy. I'm the doorkeeper to deep, dark water that everybody explores on their own. I am not a guru. I have no particular axe of my own to grind, or at least not with great vigor. The point to be made here is that psychedelics are not an ideology or a position. They are an experience, and an experience is something that we have very intimately ourselves. So it's not something you can teach people or draw too many general conclusions from. It's an experience, but it's an experience that I feel people should have. And when I see a political system or a set of cultural values that are denying people this experience, then I feel like some kind of human rights abuse is taking place. The tension between so-called straight culture and psychedelic culture is a tension over values. Psychedelics challenge the assumptions of any cultural or political system, and that makes them dangerous to every cultural and political system. So if there's anything, a Marxist dictatorship, a high-tech industrial democracy, or a theocracy, they can all get together on one thing, which is psychedelic drugs are a knife poised at the heart of community values. Well, this is just simply nonsense. And then all the reasons brought forth are, in a sense, a red herring. The psychedelics are among the safest substances known for human ingestion, considering the depth of their impact on human mental functioning. The fact that you pick yourself up 6, 7, 8 hours later and go on about your business with an expanded point of view is quite remarkable. People have a right to get stoned. They have a right to think and explore their own minds. This is as intimate a part of their being as their sexuality. And in any culture which mitigates that is clearly afraid of a full and fair and open dialogue about what reality is and what real human values ought to be. I think anybody who takes a number of psychedelic trips will eventually earn their oak leaves. I mean, you can spend difficult evenings. People who dismiss this as recreational drugs or hedonism or escapism absolutely do not know what they're talking about. This can be very challenging and difficult work. That's the ocean kayaking metaphor is more appropriate. I don't think meditation and yoga are the same enterprise.
as taking psychedelics. They are often sold as the same enterprise, but in fact nobody goes to the ashram with their knees knocking in terror over what is about to sweep over them. On the other hand, if you're taking high doses of psilocybin or DMT, this would be a perfectly reasonable response. I'm interested in everything. To my mind, the psychedelic agenda means visiting the most remote parts of the world, reading the most forgotten and obscure literatures, and having the most extreme experiences that one can enjoy safely.
One of the hardest evenings I ever spent was that combination. And I will never do that again. But I haven't been able to line up too much support. The question is, what about combining Pegamon harmala with mushrooms, with Stropharia cubensis? Now, what happened to me was I took half a dose of mushrooms, which for me would be 2.5 grams. I took 2.5 grams of mushrooms with half a dose of ayahuasca. And it was seemed crazy making to me. Very, very, very unpleasant state. I think what was happening as I analyzed it later was that short-term memory absolutely would not transcript. And so I got into this strange loop which went like this. Something's wrong. What's wrong?
Oh, God.
Nothing's wrong. Okay. Something's wrong. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Okay. And it was serious, and it went on for about an hour, and I just did not know what to do. I had the image from 2001 of the guy outside the ship saying, "Open the pod doors, Hal." Saying, "I can't do that, Dave." "Open the pod doors, Hal." "I'm sorry, Dave." And it really seemed to me I could almost see an enzymatic, I almost had like a nano-engineer's view of the problem. I could see at the synaptic level that the molecular machinery was lodged in some peculiar configuration, and I was broke into a sweat, and I just said, okay, I'm going to sit here till this goes away. I'm not going to start screaming. I'm not going to call for help. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to wait until this goes away. And then I started deep breathing as a strategy for metabolizing. And after 45 minutes or so, it kind of jiggled loose. And then it was like, oh, wow, what a bummer that was. There were times when I would just, to see what it would do, I would take half a gram of mushrooms a day, or 1 gram of mushrooms a day. I hated all these states. I quickly abandoned all these experiments because all I could do with those kinds of doses was it made me anxious. It made me think a lot about the fact that I wasn't really high, but it was rougher than coffee and just was kind of crazy making. And so I believe in large doses, rarely. I think that's what's effective. And the people want to tiptoe in. If you're a tiptoe inner, back to the ashram for you. This is no game for those who wish to tiptoe. Because those are dangerous areas, those shallow waters. Most psychedelic people, I think, would agree, where it's not the high dose that blasts your world to smithereens that leaves people upset and confused. That's usually experienced as a kind of liberation. What leaves people upset and confused is to get half in and half out and not be able to contact the transcendent, but to have all their baggage in there with them, fully illuminated, and then other people complicated. I find other people very complicating. Other people, it just stands to reason, are the most complicated objects in your universe. And, when I'm stoned on 7 or 8 grams of psilocybin, for me to be able to handle a chunk of orange without getting excited to the point of hysteria is... So let alone having somebody maybe want to have sex with you, or maybe want to discuss their bad trip with you, or maybe want to move from here down to the beach, or maybe want, and just say, go away, please.
To assume that a parent cannot hand on wisdom to a child without rejection is preposterous. And in raising my own children, who seem, knock wood, to be doing fine, I've simply not only shared with them the facts of the matter, but shared with them the fact that the distinction between adult and child is largely artificial. In other words, much of the world confuses me. Much of social situations, sexual dealings, drugs, I find myself wishing somebody had educated and explained it all to me. You don't ever suddenly understand, we all carry with us into life blank spots in our understanding. So I consider myself at age 50 to be in a state of prolonged adolescence and ever learning and assimilating and passing on to young people, which is, I don't say child, I don't say adolescent, I say young people, whatever I know, and learning from them similarly.
It's almost as though Western science was fascinated by energy. For 5,000 years we pursued understanding energy, and this process ends with thermonuclear explosions in the deserts of the American Southwest. We can light the fire that burns in the heart of the distant stars. We know how to do that. That's what the Western mind achieved, political issues aside. The Eastern mind was not interested in energy. It was interested in time. And they spent 5,000 years deconstructing it, looking at it, and you don't use atom smashers, you don't use enormous physical pressure. It's a different problem, and you bring different tools to bear. You meditate, you look inside yourself, you study the movement of water around pebbles, you consider the situation, you study history.
You can't go forward and you can't stand still. Thunder don't get you, then the lightning will.
All the metaphors being handed down from the top are bogus, because the people at the top, they don't know what is going on. They have to pay guys ponytails just to turn on the machines in the morning. They are so deeply in our hands that it brings a tear to my eye to even think about it. And so it's very important to be gentle with people. And this could almost serve as a final point. My mission, aside from whatever agenda my ego has about how I want to be the guy who figured out how everything works and all that, get the combined Nobel Peace Prize and Physics Prize. But aside from that, and far more important to you, what this is all about, I believe, is permitting people to abandon anxiety and empower people and say, hey, look, you don't have to go, I mean, he's a nice man, don't misunderstand me, but you don't have to ask Ramana Maharshi or Gurdjieff, another nice man, don't get me wrong, but not smarter than you or me. That's the thing. Haven't you figured out by now that nobody is smarter than you are? And if they are, you can't understand what they're saying anyway, so why bother? The search for somebody smarter than you are is totally futile, because when you find them, you're not going to know what the hell they're talking about. So basically, it's better to get high with a little help from your friends. And to take yourself seriously, to take your life seriously, your body seriously, and your position seriously. And I'm now much more interested in a virtual presence, a presence on the net, a presence as a published voice, and like that. And I think we all can act from that position. Less squandering of energy, more sharing of ideas, more a sense of community. It's going to be a wild ride from here to the end, and everybody at some point along the way need a little reassurance. It may be me next week and you next year, but sooner or later it'll get everybody's goat, at least for a moment. And so a sense of collectivity, a sense of sharing, and a sense of adventure. So there you have it. Or so there you have it, as the king said to Mozart. I'm going to keep my remarks brief this evening. I think a visit by Albert Hofmann to America, the foundation of a library that bears his name, that will serve as an archive for the research that has been locked away in filing cabinets and packing boxes for 30 years. And in concert with the political situation in the society, the larger society around us, is a sufficient reason for pausing for a moment and actually considering what is the psychedelic experience, what promise does it hold for a sane future for our planet and our children, and what is it about it that kindles the kind of loyalty that I feel coming from the people in this room this evening. And I submit to you that it is nothing less than the rebirth of a voice that has been silent for at least 1,000 years. The still small voice of the logos of the planet. You know, the Old Testament says you don't have to study the difference between good and evil. You know it. The still small voice in your heart elucidates the correct way to live. And in Western culture, this still small voice has been stilled for over a millennia, and we have operated in a world that is reductionist, objectivist, materialistic, secular, male-dominated, stressing stasis, stressing the minute particulars in favor of the great overarching picture. And in some way, we have lost our way. And it remained for giants of 20th century thought like Freud and Jung to announce
the startling fact that there was a human unconscious. And then it took still a different generation of researchers with a different set of analytical skills to take the concepts of the unconscious and turn it into a frontier full of challenge, to a topological manifold that courageous minds could sail out into to map and to explore. And squarely then, in the path of the materialist, reductionist, crypto-fascist dreams of high-tech industrialism, there emerged a mystery, the last thing you would expect, a true mystery. Now, Dr. Hoffman has been lauded here this evening for his invention of LSD. Certainly this is what he will be remembered for over the long centuries ahead. But as a matter of fact, he is a thinker of extreme breadth and depth. It was he, working with Carl Ruck and Gordon Wasson, who proposed that it was actually psychoactive ergot alkaloids that lay behind the Eleusinian mysteries, and thereby rubbed the nose of classical scholarship in the fact that the foundation and the wellspring of the Western imagination, which was the mystery cults of ancient Greece, that foundation is firmly rooted in a psychedelic experience. That when we leave these things behind, we leave behind our cultural birthright, no less than when the Amazonian Indian deserts his home village for the sawmills. We too were once tribal people who lived in the light of mysteries that came to us mediated by shamans and created out of the magic of the natural world. It was Albert Hoffman who synthesized psilocybin for the first time and described its absolute structural characteristics. This is a man who is astride both the synthetic and natural product chemistry of the 20th century like no one else. His research has revealed the unexpected fact that there are biodynamic alkaloids in our environment, in our food chain, indeed in our history, that argue that we are the bearers of a great promise, that the future of consciousness can be endlessly bright. In the future, it will be unimaginable that governments once regulated the substances that people use to explore personal growth. It is the mark of a barbarous culture, and we are here to raise a light, to say truth is not so easily swept aside. One doesn't just say no to truth. Truth requires engagement, it requires courage, it requires a sense of where we have been and of where we are going.
I think, I think that we hardly have an inkling as to the real nature of the world and the real history of life on this planet. And, we don't know how narrowly channeled the manifestation of organic intelligence is. Does it always have to be in a body? Does it always have to be in a body that stands upright with binocular vision? I think the real task with dealing with extraterrestrials is to know when you've got one. It's completely silly to search the galaxy with radio telescopes for a radio civilization. I mean, to my mind, that is as chuckle-headed as deciding you're going to search the galaxy for a decent Italian restaurant. I mean, it doesn't work like that. form. Well then, if you look at the mushroom, it's a curious combination of artifact and entity. It looks sort of manufactured. There's very little fat on that system. The other thing is then the spore looks perfectly designed to sustain itself in outer space. If you want to store spores for longevity, you create conditions as close to the conditions in outer space as you possibly can. High vacuum, very low temperature. The casing of a spore is one of the most electron-dense organic materials in nature. So electron-dense that it approximates a metal. Well, global currents can form on the quasi-metallic surface of an airborne spore, and they act as a further repellent for hard radiation. So, and you know, percolating through the galaxy at an ordinary rate typical of stellar material, a mushroom species could percolate from one side of the galaxy to the other in under 400,000 years. Well, that's lightning speed compared to the size and age of the universe. If we were to gain the power to design ourselves, I think after a whole bunch of you know, Madonna and Robert Redford clones, we would probably move on to becoming something very much like a mushroom. It's, you know, mild, it's non-invasive, it's at the bottom of the food chain, it's virtually immortal, it's laden with neurotransmitters, and it's living in the imagination.
DMT is a miracle. I mean, DMT is like something that fell out of a flying saucer. I mean, it is so strong and so psychedelic. I mean, I can't imagine being more smashed than that, or wanting to be. I mean, it's more like a near-death experience than any near-death experience I ever heard anybody describe. They sound absolutely pedestrian compared to a DMT trip where, you know, you're sure you're dead. You say, what the hell else could it be? You know? We're about to have a chance to create a global culture, to decide, to essentially clean our basement and decide what we're going to save and what we're going to keep. What we need to change is our minds. That's the part that's doing us dirt and dragging us under. The Gaian process is more than a process. It is a self-reflecting intellect of some sort. Because talk is cheap. God, if I don't know that, who does?
On DMT, some people, and I'm one of them, speak in strange languages, spontaneously. They don't even, in some cases, know they're doing it. They just seem to fall into this. And it's ecstatic to do. For some reason, this is just an incredibly, it's what you want to do. It seems to be the obvious thing to do, to speak in this peculiar way. And at first I heard it for years, moving so fast. It was like, I called it elf chatter. And then, I don't know why, diligent prayer or something was able to slow it down, and I found I could do it. And I went out to Hawaii years ago and took a voice-activated tape recorder, and I spent a week. I took 8 grams of mushrooms every night, nearly every night for a week, and made these recordings. And what I came down with were these recordings which people find extremely alarming to listen to. They hear it and they just are convinced. They're not like, it's not like, well, it just makes people think you're crazy. They just say, you know, okay, so you were sitting in a tent halfway up a mountain all by yourself
And what you chose to do was shriek in Norstratic for some reason. Now, I still think that the secret of the psychedelics, or the point of all this, has to do with the language. Oh, you want some glossolalia? Yeah. Okay, then I'm out of here. Okay. Glossolalia, without introduction. Mi namna yao huai waxiki pipin I doljikim hua huakteki pulket eldignama hangwapa geheke shvi ikul nindagnan kitin. Ithititi kwai huaksidigi ulkt efti ulget minquateke onquaxit vibu ulgin drapa alkektecht. Ningol begagang kekt kwe patapahakwagang toljimi bikulque papahakangtakt. Efto chikabel igum wipul kektak sikipiping. Iftit chikwai wahakakt vuhungul. Vundu hupiti ichult huwak safabapangul hotech miunik wotel deva hoichpult. That's it, I'm out of here. You know, what does it mean that you can, what does it mean? What does it mean, Mr. Natural? It don't mean shit, isn't that the answer to that? That in fact, what happens is that this stuff, which we call mind, takes the shape of its container, the way water takes the shape of a container. And when mind is folded down into the tiny, eensy-beensy, cramped container of bourgeois, American, materialist, Republican, howly existence, it becomes a kind of a narrow experience of some sort, if you know what I mean.
You've often spoken about the flying saucer as a kind of manifestation of the overmind. I'd like to hear you consider the possibility that the anticipated self-awareness of our cybernetic networks could in fact fulfill that role.
Well, I think culture, technology is some kind of a mirror of our aspirations. And Carl Jung, the Swiss death psychologist, was the person who early on in the flying saucer thing saw that it could be analyzed as a manifestation of the unconscious. For Jung, that didn't mean it was being reduced in importance, because for him the unconscious was a kind of magical fourth dimension in which all these archetypes were moving. It is the technical condensation of an archetypal dream. It's made of a substance which can do anything. I mean, you can eat it, you can take a shower under it. It has pictures of distant places on it. In other words, it's an area where matter has begun to behave like mind. And this is the technocratic dream. It's very interesting the way in which the dreams of alchemy of the 16th century, culmination of those alchemical illusions, has all been achieved in the 20th century. The transmutation of base metals into gold, the release of unimaginable amounts of energy, and so forth and so on. But now, in the realm of cybernetic mirroring of human imagination in the technology called virtual reality, the flying saucer image is guiding, I think, the direction in which these technologies are moving. The idea being that everyone will be given a kind of flying saucer or magic carpet into a tinker toy construction set that is software that allows you to then decide whether you want to live in the Frank Lloyd Wright waterfall house or the Palace of Versailles or Graceland or wherever. And these, you have pull-down menus to move among these environments that are essentially software and packaged. So the flying saucer, to my mind, will have, it's the condensation of technical ability into an omni-adaptable, techno-biological, psychomental device, which means, you know, the place where all these vectors of media and invention and micro-miniaturization and nanotechnology and all this sort of thing come together. The engineering mentality will do this, will create this kind of situation, and then the challenge is for the social body politic, which is made up of thinking minds and enlightened souls rather than data banks and that sort of thing, will have then the wisdom to feminize it and apply it. But in that sense, the flying saucer is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the flying saucer didn't exist, we would create it. And we're pulling it out of the future as an image of our own collective aspirations, because it indicates triumph over matter and therefore the solution to all our problems. And as a guiding image, it is very powerful. As a practical social goal, the limits of that idea have yet to be tested.
I was in a restaurant in Malibu with Bob Chartoff and Lou Carlino, who some of you know, a bunch of fancy Hollywood-type people. And there was this French producer there, this woman, and she and I had been seated together at dinner, and she said, "You say that the mushroom speaks to you, but I don't understand how this can be. What do you mean it speaks to you?" And and Ralph Abraham was there too, and I, in my sincere way, said, "Well, it's like the part Steiger played in The Pawnbroker. It just," and at that moment, Steiger stops by the table to shake hands with everybody there, and I'm like, and true story, true story. And Ralph, who's watched this whole thing go down, leans across the table to me and says, "What this proves is the mushroom can reach into our world no matter where we are and shake the bars."
History has failed. History is the shock wave of eschatology. What does this mean? It means we must live as though the apocalypse had already happened. It means we must part company with all the false value systems that have led to this moment. History has failed. Evasion! Evasion! Evasion is the key to sliding through the cracks of the linear dominator society. You must evade all these traps and live in the authentic moment. This is where you are free.
Citizens, the age of secrets has ended. The news of the portals through time is now to be told. No more the secret of a ruling elite. You must understand that through an act of natural magic carried out at ruins scattered around the world, it is possible to open doorways into time, to move from the future to the past, to move from dreams into the future. This is to be done through acts of tantric sexuality carried out under the influence of DMT at certain secret spots previously guarded by defunct societies of men wearing dresses, constipated guardians of the secrets of the future, now to be made part of your world. Join us in the conquest of time. Evasion.
I do not understand why people transfer loyalty to role models. You have to be incredibly naive about what people are to believe that a role model is in fact worthy, because, you know, people are just people, and there's no I don't see great differences in spiritual elevation among people. That's why lineages and all that seem to me just another form of foolishness. The mushroom spoke to me once on this subject many years ago and said, for one human being to seek enlightenment from another is like one grain of sand on the beach to seek enlightenment from another. It's a wonderful statement about our commonality. If you want to talk to the Dalai Lama, close the door of your bedroom and have a dialogue with the mirror. You're as good as the Dalai Lama, for crying out loud. Who could suppose otherwise?
I mean, science is really, it's the plumbing level of reality. It doesn't catch, you know, the integrated nature of language, the evolution of fairy tale, the dynamics of love affairs, the quintessence of genius. These are the things that as human beings structure and constellate and guide and inform our world. And science has nothing to say about these things. Mathematics, on the other hand, is like the bedrock celebration of these things. It empowers intuition. It discovers intuition to be the most powerful epistemic tool that we have. More powerful than induction, more powerful than deduction. Intuition is the unifying of experience into a gestalt image of the world, a coming together within the organism of a correct imaging of the world. Now, what do I mean by correct imaging? All I mean is a provisional image that carries you to the next moment. This is all we can hope for at this stage. We are much more suited for dancing than for whatever it is that we have been doing. You know, whatever it wasn't dancing. We are a part of nature. We are a part of light. We are a part of the energy field of the planet. We are not its keeper in the sense that it is not given unto us to understand it. That was all a horrible misunderstanding. The idea that we should understand reality and then somehow make something of it. Alfred North Whitehead said that understanding is the apperception of pattern as such. As such. That's all. So here we have a room full of people. Well, it's a pattern. It's many patterns. It's the pattern of how men and women are mixed together statistically as we scan from left to right. If I see a pattern there, I know something about the crowd. I understand something about the crowd. The pattern tells me something and I call that understanding. But we could analyze the crowd from the point of view of the distribution of young people and old people, or people in colors in the red-blue spectrum as according to the yellow-white spectrum. Each one of these things is a way of analyzing the pattern in the room. And each one of these patterns tells the perceiver more about what is going on in the room. Because the room is not a distribution of young people and old people, a distribution of men and women, or a distribution of garment colors. The room is a mystery, a recessional mystery that presents itself as a series of interlocking patterns of infinite depth. There is a moment in which the first mate, Starbuck, Ahab is raving on, and Ahab and the first mate, who represents Christian right reason, tries to inject a note of sanity into this undertaking. In other words, he's the straight man. He stands for Calvinism, rectitude, reason, science. And he says, speaking to Ahab, Starbuck says, Ahab has just shouted to the crew, "Art not game for Moby Dick?" And Starbuck says, "I am game for his crooked jaw, and for the jaws of death too, Captain Ahab, if it fairly comes in the way of the business we follow. But I came here to hunt whales, not my commander's vengeance. How many barrels will thy vengeance yield thee, even if thou gettest it, Captain Ahab? It will not fetch thee much in our Nantucket market." Nantucket market, hoot. But look closer, man. Thou requirest a little lower layer. If money's to be the measure, man, and the accountants have computed their great counting house, the globe, by girdling it with guineas, 1 to every 3 parts of an inch, then let me tell thee that my vengeance will fetch a great premium. Here! He smites his chest, whispered Stubb. What's that for? Methinks it rings most vast but hollow. And then Starbuck delivers the famous line. "Vengeance on a dumb brute," cried Starbuck, "that simply smote thee from blindest instinct? Madness! To be enraged with a dumb thing, Captain Ahab, seems blasphemous." And Ahab says, "Hark ye yet again the little lower layer. All visible objects, man, are but as pasteboard masks. But in each event, in the living act, the undoubted deed, there some unknown but still reasoning thing puts forth the moldings of its features from beneath the unreasoning mask. If man will strike, strike through the mask. How can the prisoner reach outside except by thrusting through the wall? To me, the white whale is that wall, shoved near to me. Sometimes I think there's naught beyond, but 'tis enough. He tasks me, he heaps me. I see in him outrageous strength, with an inscrutable malice sinewing it. That inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate. And be the white whale agent, or be the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him. Talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike out the sun if it insulted me. For could the sun do that, then could I do the other, since there is ever a sort of fair play herein, jealousy presiding over all creations. But not my master, man, is even that fair play. Who's over me? Truth hath no confines. Take off thine eye, more intolerable than fiends' glarings is a doltish stare. So, thou reddenest and palest, my heart has melted thee to anger glow. But look ye, Starbuck, what is said in heat, that thing unsays itself. There are men from whom warm words are small in dignity. I meant not to incense thee. Let it go, let it go. Look, yon Turkish cheeks of spotted tan, living, breathing pictures painted by the sun, the pagan leopards, the unrecking and unworshipping things that live and seek and give no reasons for the torrid life they feel. The crew, man, the crew! Are they not one and all with Ahab in this matter of the whale? See Stubb, he laughs. See yonder Chilean, he snorts to think of it. Stand up amid the general hurricane, thy one-tossed sapling cannot, Starbuck. And what is it? Reckon it.
'tis but to help strike a fin. No wondrous feat for Starbuck. What is it more? From this one poor hunt, then, the best lance out of all Nantucket? Surely he will not hang back when every foremast hand has clutched a whetstone. Ah, constraining seas thee, I see. The billow lifts thee. Speak, but speak. Aye, thy silence then, that voices thee. And then in an aside, something shot from my dilated nostrils. He has inhaled it in his lungs. Starbuck now is mine, cannot oppose me now without rebellion.
Well, I think the problem is that we have too long ignored the possibility that reality is stranger than we can suppose. I mean, let this reverberate in your mind. Not that means no model will ever work. It means it will always be provisional. That the understanding of what it is will always recede ahead of any epistemic program to describe, enclose, explain. This is all a fallacy. If you believe that you are embarked on a finite project where eventually you will issue a white paper and that will explain how the boar ate the cabbage, it's not to be explained. And we have, I think because of unique characteristics of the male ego, chosen to operate with the assumption that we can understand, that the human mind can in fact grok larger and larger levels of embeddedness and make sense of them. It can't be understood. It is a receding mystery. It is a continuing carrot. It cannot be brought under the aegis of rational apprehension. It says in Moby Dick, reality outran apprehension. It always outruns apprehension, because apprehension is the primitive functioning of the primate neural network. And reality, who knows? Who would even care to take a guess, you know? It's a mystery. You do not measure the depth of a universal mystery with the neural network of a primate. Our role is not to understand, but to appreciate. To appreciate. We have an immense capacity for resonance with beauty, aesthetic awareness, appreciation of form, appreciation of how things go together. It's ridiculous to attempt to seize the tiller of reality because we don't even know where we want to go. So the notion that by creating these models of reality which are not acknowledged as models, but which are called scientific truth, we betray ourselves down the primrose path that leads to dreary, dusty death. Because what we do is we take the poetry out of being. We extract the poetry from being by the assumption of the mundane. The banality of modernity is what I call this. The banality of modernity, the steady flattening of values so that nothing means much. You know, the sense of outrage over political mistreatment of the underprivileged, or the sense of outrage as a society slips toward the abyss, or the sense of outrage when people mistreat you, is muted. Everything is flattened by the banality of modernity. This is the heritage of all the bad little boys of the 19th century. Nietzsche and Darwin and Hegel and Schopenhauer. These clowns were on a bad trip, and they were loud about it. And what they give us is a universe devoid of soul. How much
of what we call true humanness made the journey with us to this new time. We're going to find out. We're going to find out by pooling the love that is in each of us in a form in which it is coextensively shared by all of us. There may be many ways to talk about what this will feel like, what it will look like, but what it will be, if it works, is love. If it isn't love, then it's less than a perfect sublimation of the alchemical purpose, and less than perfect is now off the menu. So the only way up is out, up and out. That's all I have to say.
I was always very prone to obsession, and one obsession gave way to another, so that rock collecting gave way to butterflies, which gave way to rocketry, which gave way to girls, which gave way to drugs, which gave way to politics, on and on and on. Fascinated with the world. I have called myself at times a noetic archaeologist. What I like to do is go and dig up, not pot shards and glass beads, but ideas. Old ideas that have been under the dirt a long, long time. And this is what I essentially did here with the I Ching. And Gnosticism is another boneyard, and alchemy is another boneyard, and the Maya are another boneyard, and ancient Hawaii is another. And I love to go into these things and draw conclusions, you know. It's all very pregnant with intention toward the person who comes to it with an open mind. I mean, everything wants to speak, everything wants to guide us. But my approach to this kind of thing is basically Jungian. I mean, that's where I got my interest in all of this material. See, I think that what we're always seeing is psyche, that we're always seeing a mirroring of the intentionality of ourselves to concretize consciousness, to put a name on it. I was sort of like following the track. Many people were having these kinds of experiences at just that time. But then in February of 1967, I sort of found my way at the front of the parade when one rainy evening in Berkeley, this friend of mine, who I'm still extremely tight with, and this guy always was first in everything, and you know, he made it his business to burn through and abandon things before you'd ever heard of them. And he arrived at my house this rainy February night, and he said, "I have something I want you to try." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "It's a new psychedelic." And I said, "How long does it last?" And he said, 3 minutes. And I said, "No problem, you know, we're acid heads. We can handle 3 minutes of anything." And sat down and smoked my first DMT. And, you know, it's never been the same since. I mean, it worked 100%. Yes, this was the famous 55-gallon drum that was boosted off a army conveyance vehicle when it was moved from SRI to some proving ground in the Southwest. The U.S. Army was trying to develop an aerosol artillery shell that would land in a Vietnamese village, drive everyone nuts, and you could send your people in and take over in all this gaseous, hallucinogenic confusion. And DMT and even then more debilitating psychedelics were being looked at in the service of this. And it's a famous story in the underground that there was this one 55-gallon drum of pure crystalline material that somebody just made sure fell into a ditch in Menlo Park somewhere, and somebody else came along 5 minutes later and picked it up. And rumor persists that that 55-gallon drum is not empty yet. Apocryphal stories abound of burial sites near Hudson's Bay, in the deserts of the Namib, other places. It's been moved around. Even the Dome of the Rock was indicated at one time. So I don't suggest you go looking for it under the Dome of the Rock. Your intellectual toolkit needs to be full of adjectives, metaphors, models, and possibilities. And then you can say of DMT, well, it was like the Sistine Chapel altar, except that instead of the kind of light you get in Caravaggio or somebody like that, there was a kind of, the sort of thing Matthias Gruenwald is doing in his Resurrection, where if somebody doesn't know what any of this is, they're having a kind of DMT experience of their own, just listening to you. Because they say, what did he say? Was he say? What? But if you know what you mean and speak precisely, all these words have meaning. Sistine Chapel altar, light like Caravaggio, modified as the way Gruenwald did it, and so forth and so on. So somehow it's still an incredible flattening. I don't mean that this is an adequate tool. I mean it's a tool. I am perfectly aware that the most high-flown and hysteria-provoking descriptions of DMT I've ever been able to summon up in front of a group were complete betrayals of the real thing. So not what it was that the word lie is almost applicable. But it's the best I can do. And that's why I have said this morning, this idea of building the internet as a net for capturing the alien mind. If we go into the internet and I build the weirdest and most mind-boggling virtual reality I can imagine, and then turn it over to you, and you come in and add your filigrees, adumbrations, cupolas, and what have you, and then we hand it over to you, and you do the same. By now, this thing has gotten pretty weird. Just this intensification of weirdness, slowly we can build up an image of it. But I don't think a single person could possibly have the breadth and depth of experience to do it alone. Maybe a Thomas Pynchon or someone like that. But we're involved in a communication struggle here. We're trying to describe the unspeakable. We're trying to literally move the boundaries of what can be said and what can't be said. We're trying to push the frontiers of what can be said deeper into the domain of the unspeakable. And are we succeeding or failing? Well, that's for each one of us to judge. I know every time I smoke DMT, the first emotion I have as it fully establishes itself in my sensorium is that I have the sense of remembering what it really is and having this sort of guilt/embarrassment about realizing how hideously unfaithful I am to the truth of it. This truth can't be told, or at least not by me. I've been trying for 20 years, and I have created an object in discourse that fascinates people. But is it DMT? No, it's me doing the best I can.
Anyway, the last point I want to make, because I think this is very important, we all talk about psychedelics, the impact on ourselves, the individual experience. But what are they when you look at 1 million psychedelic trips? What does it do to society? What it does is it dissolves boundaries. It dissolves the ultimate boundary, which is the ultimate fuck-up, which is ego. Ego is something invented by frightened people 20,000 years ago as a way to suppress women, as a way to suppress sexuality, as a way to suppress the wonder inherent in the world. Psychedelics are catalysts for the human imagination. We were called forth out of monkey existence by the fact that we had strange eating habits. And the consequence of those strange eating habits is now a monkey can dream of transforming its collective soul into a flying saucer. This is the goal that lies ahead at the end of history. History doesn't go on endlessly fluctuating centuries into the future. History is leading toward the transformation of this planet in our lifetime. A cybernetic, biological, psychedelic being, the collectivity not only of humanity but of all life on Earth, is struggling to be born. The entire universe of matter is the womb of mind, and it is the task of human beings to lead the collectivity of humanity out of the labyrinth of matter and into the realm of the imagination. The imagination is where we're all going to live. The imagination is the only place where the human soul is at home.
Hey, Nick. You made it, man.
Oh, did you want to?
Sure, let me sit down. I knew you'd come. I saw it in your eyes, man. You're gonna love this. Terence is a genius. He's gonna blow your mind all over the goddamn room. He's like a freaking mind grenade.
Not sure I want that.
Yeah, but you need it. That's why you're here.
History has these dominator types by the balls, and it's not going to let up. You know, history is a psychedelic experience. It's the collective unfolding of the dream of our species in space and time. And we are at the apex. This is the peak. This is the second hour of the trip. We're going over the top.
Now, I've been accused of mysticism. And worse.
I've sorted through, just as I assume you are doing, trying to figure out, taking seriously what Alan Watts and Joe Campbell and all those people, Jung, trying to figure out, what are these people talking about? Is it just abstract? Can it ever be reached? And I sat at the feet of various rishis, roshis, geishas, and gurus. I swept up around the ashram and so forth and so on. And, you know, these people just don't have the moxie. I mean, maybe they've got something, but we don't have 1,000 years to unravel this thing. It is a sinking submarine. Chatter is now out of bounds. My daughter, who I haven't seen for a while, is coming today, and it caused me to think of an incident that happened to she and I years ago here at Eschaton. And it's a story which makes no sense whatsoever, but it really, truly happened, as far as I can tell. But it has all the qualities that bedevil this kind of thing. And what it was I was, as I am now, scholar in residence. It must have been some 10 years or so, 8 years or so ago. So Clea would have been like 9, and I would have been 40. So we were both younger and more naive. And it was dinner time at the lodge, and it was this time of year and this time of weather. And the fog had been coming all day in and out in the garden. And it was, and we genuflect here, God love him, to Carlos Castaneda, it was that very strange time of day, which only lasts a few minutes between daytime and nighttime, the crack between the world, I believe. It's interesting in South America and also in Hawaii, at precisely that moment, every day, there are certain species of Lepidoptera that rearrange themselves. In other words, that come out from wherever they've been hiding for 24 hours, fly around furiously for 5 minutes, and then disappear again for 24 hours. But anyway, it was precisely that time of day, and the fog was coming in and out of the garden, and we were not in a mood for anything peculiar. We were intent on dinner, and we were walking the path through the garden, and suddenly, as this fog moved and cleared, coming down one of the rows was a bunny, a small rabbit, except that it had very small, short horns. Now, some of you may know the creature called the jackalope. The jackalope is a large jackrabbit with a pair of antelope horns, and it is a creature known only to exist above certain low-class bars scattered across California and Oregon. It's up on the wall, the jackalope. It's something you kid tourists with. As far as I could see, this was a baby jackalope about this high, and it crossed the trail no more than 5 feet in front of us. We both saw it, and our attitude was not amazement or an awareness that we were entering into a paranormal dimension. Both of us, I think our reaction was, come on. And then immediately behind it was a man, a very thin, not particularly healthy-looking man with a shaved head, wearing something like a gray running suit. And he was running crouched.
he was, with his hands out like this, he was trying to catch the jack-a-bunny. And when he saw us, he appeared very confused and stood up and turned and walked the other way. And I just took her by the elbow and I said, "Let's get out of here." And then we went to dinner, and we've talked about it immediately after and since. And as far as anybody can reasonably and decently tell, this is the straight story on what happened. Well, it doesn't make any sense. First of all, the earth doesn't move from its pinions. But what does it say? It says that attention falling into a certain place of non-attention is set up for something like this to happen. And I can't explain it. I don't think it's explainable. It's sort of like, when you study quantum physics and they tell you that a black hole mostly puts out electrons, but the theory allows that it could eject Miatas and grand pianos, except that it would be very rare for it to eject a grand piano. But the theory does not preclude the ejection of grand pianos. So it's something like that, or it's a group hallucination, or it's a bewitchment, or, and it begins to proliferate. I was thinking about it last night or this morning, because I was in that place where I saw it happen. I was thinking, maybe Eschaton lasts a really long time. Like maybe it's sort of like the Piazza San Marco in Venice, or the Central Aryan Stonehenge. Maybe we're actually starting something here that will last so long that for the next 5,000 years, people will relate to the Alchemical Garden, and that somehow it's a nexus for others on strange missions. Now, the other thing about that story that I like, or that relieved me, is I guess the way to put it, is notice that it's absurd. And by being absurd, it's self-canceling. Suppose instead of a jackalope, which is an absurd creature to begin with, suppose it had been a gray of the wraparound eye type that are apparently trading high technology to the government for human fetal tissue, those people, then you would have had a real dilemma on your hands, because grays are objects of cultural fascination. In other words, if you see a gray, you just become part of a statistical body of people who've seen one. And so it's like more problematic. It's not that it's a non-reality, it's that it's a sort of a non-reality. This is, I think, part of the clue to understanding alien abductions and the way we generate information. If I tell you that I was up late last night and couldn't sleep and walked along the cliffs over Eschaton, and that I encountered a shining disk, and that I then had my navel lint was removed by a team of extraterrestrial cosmetologists, this is evidence for an already existing body of data. If you say, well, you should call MUFON, they'd be very interested in this, or you should call somebody else. If I tell you I was restless last night and walked the cliffs of Eschaton, and that I encountered Bugs Bunny in the company of Patrick Swayze, people would just say, you're nuts. It's not sanctioned. It's not allowed. And nobody gives a hoot or takes it seriously for a moment, because it serves no one's agenda. It's just insane data and should be immediately tossed out. This shows us, that the objects in the unconscious are given different weights. And you can tell a crazy story and join a self-help group. But if your story is too crazy, they won't have a group for you. They'll have a cell for you. So it's worth bearing in mind. Let's be generous here. Someone had prepared a bunny with horns to surprise someone else with whom they'd had a lifelong running joke about jackalopes. And they had arrived at Eschaton for the surprise birthday party of this person and realized that the bunny was frantic because it hadn't eaten on the long trip. So they took the jack-a-bunny in its cage down to the garden to steal some lettuce for it. And in the fog and in the effort not to be seen, the bunny escaped with its horns in place. And this person, who probably didn't have a gate pass anyway, could see the whole situation getting out of hand and was frantically trying to capture the horned bunny and get it back in its... See people say, gee, what a party pooper this guy is. Well, yeah, but we're trying to save the laws of physics and reason here, for crying out loud. But I have to tell you, that doesn't feel right to what it is. It felt to me like, I don't know, we all live in private Idahos. And somehow I was in somebody else's private Idaho for a moment, against my will. But I think we should always prefer the simplest explanation. Sometimes the simple explanation, like in a case like that, is maddeningly complex in itself. But if you don't believe that's what's happened, well then what do you believe? Do you believe that mythological animals are a potential infestation problem in the Eschaton Gardens? Or just where do you draw the line? There should be something called the Vegetable Drug Act, which simply states no plant is illegal. Period. Just that's it. And it would all sort itself out. And the junkie could have his little opium garden, and I don't know if cokeheads could get it together enough to fill their backyard with coke. It would all sort out very, very nicely. And it's preposterous. I mean, you read that in the Middle Ages, that in 1432 in Amsterdam, a pig was hung for murder. And then that's the kind of thing we've got going with the concept of an illegal plant. I mean, from any future enlightened point of view, they would just look back at that and say, how quaint. What a bizarre notion of reality. My hope is that here in the final ticking of the clock of history, we are going to end our prodigal descent into the desert world of the ego and return with what we have learned, the fruits of the prodigal journeying of the errant son, which is what history has been, return with the fruits of that prodigal wandering to the larger human family that waits on us in the rainforests, in the deserts, in the marshes, in the thorn forests of this planet. The archaic people are waiting for us to get on the train, and then the train will be able to depart. But we have to awaken to our past, and then we can set a course toward a meaningful future. we can embrace chaos and see that chaos is the environment in which we all thrive. That's how I've done it for years. You think I could have gotten away with this in the Soviet Union? I don't think so. I require a society on the brink of social breakdown to be able to do my work. And I think a society on the brink of social breakdown is the healthiest situation for individuals. I don't know how many of you have ever had the privilege of being in a society in a pre-revolutionary situation, but the cafes stay open all night, and there's music in the streets, and you can breathe it, you can feel it, and you know what is happening. The dominator is being pushed. It never succeeds. It never is able to claim itself. But on the other hand, history is young. We may have a crack at this. A global society is coming into being. A global society made out of information that was not intended to be ours, but which is ours through the mistaken invention and distribution of small computers, the printing press, all of this stuff. Information is power, and information has been spilled by the clumsy handling of the cybernetic revolution by the dominator culture so that it is everywhere. Never has the situation been more fluid. Never have the opportunities for infiltration, insurrection, and hell-raising been more present at hand. But we have to seize the opportunity. We have to seize the opportunity because the world doesn't have that much more to run unless somebody begins to shake the apple cart. If we don't begin to shake the apple cart, then the apple cart is just going to sail over the cliff and be lost. Democracy, I believe in. I mean, I think democracy is the psychedelic form of government because I don't see it as a product of rational thought. I see it as institutionalized anarchy. Democracy is biology managed for human purposes. You know, it honors the biological unit. It takes the biological unit and gives it a vote. And that's a way for Mother Nature to then enter into human history. I mean, I'm fairly mystical about democracy, sort of like William Blake. I think, you know, that we have to consciously deconstruct this constipated, classical, industrial, linear, dominator civilization that we're trapped inside because it's a vehicle we can't steer. It's glued to the tracks which run right over the cliff. If we cannot alter the assumptions of this society, if the George Bushes and Helmut Kohls of this world are going to continue to run things, then, you know, head for the bunkers, folks, and pray, because the bunkers aren't going to be any consolation. This is serious business that we're engaged in, and it is, on one level among ourselves, it is communication and sharing and opening and building consensus. But when we turn away from our family and out toward the uncomprehending or even hostile world outside, then it becomes propaganda. It becomes a struggle for the hearts and minds of people everywhere. And I think most people are with us. It's simply that they haven't had it explained to them in such a way that they were able to realize that. In other words, we're not out to convert anybody to anything.
We're out to help people discover that they agreed with this point of view all along. It has to be so because, after all, we stand for something fairly simple and unambiguous. Life, survival, continuity, caring, relationship, feeling, joy. Who's going to vote against this if it's properly explained to them? So I view these things as consciousness-raising sessions in the old style, and hope that you will see it as more than even privately inspiring entertainment, but that you will go out and get these points of view to people, get these attitudes out, not unto the greater glory of Terence McKenna or Nicole Maxwell or the Ojai Foundation, but because this needs to be said. It needs to be empowered. The first step towards solving any problem is an awareness that the problem exists. Now, we're all very tired of that because we've been suffering and agonizing over the problem of a dying Earth, some of us for years. Nevertheless, the astonishing news is some folks haven't heard or have only heard recently. And it's very important not to panic them or alarm them, but to inspire them and motivate them and bring them into the project of reclaiming the Earth. I mean, this is our legacy. This is our birthright. It is the legacy and birthright of our unborn children. And, you know, there isn't even, maybe there is, but I don't know it. Rich as Greek is, there isn't a word for being so perverse that you devour your own children. The Manaids, the women possessed of Dionysic frenzy, what was always put against them was that they devoured their own children. This is a propaganda image that to be smeared with this is to be tainted very deeply. Well, it is literally true that we are guilty of a crime which the ancients could barely conceive. We are looting the planet for our pleasure. Our condominiums, speedboats, and electronic gadgetry is literally part of the legacy of our children. What kind of people comprise the larger society in which we are embedded that they would do a thing like that? It's a crime beyond war. War, you simply slaughter all the fools who volunteer for it and all the fools who stand around and watch. But to destroy the potential of a future for our children is a crime that boggles the mind. And this is the final stage of the dominator metaphor. When I picked up the New York Times a year ago and read that the United States State Department was advocating the spraying of aerial herbicides over the Waijaga Basin to eradicate coca, to me it felt like a turning point, comparable to the assassination of John Kennedy or Pearl Harbor. It was so clearly perverse, so clearly directed against itself. The contradictions become so odious that at a certain point, people of moral dignity feel they have no option left except to somehow throw themselves on the cogs of the machinery to try and halt it from carrying out the program of Moloch, the program of self-devourment that we have set in motion. Now, if ever there was a moment to talk to your neighbors, clarify your own thinking, support organizations that are trying to make a difference, now is the time. And we can make a difference. And I know you have heard that, and it's a cliche, and there's a tendency not to believe it.
I'd been hearing, Botanical Dimensions was fairly narrowly focused until a couple of years ago on saving shamanic hallucinogens. Then, really through Katz's process, the need was felt to encompass this whole problem of destruction of the warm tropics. So I began writing letters to the UN and the IMF and the World Bank and all of these people, expecting to find a vast, well-funded edifice of typing pools and computer networks and people doing something. I discovered that very little is going on. We have advanced a long, long way down this path on yak alone. There is not somewhere vast organizations toiling to contact every Brazilian politician and put the twist on him, toiling to contact every American corporation that is contributing to this atrocity and threatening them with stock sell-offs, boycotts, and whatever. All the obvious things that you may think are being done, you may then dismiss by saying, well, I'm sure I shouldn't do that. Surely somewhere a staff of 50 is working on that problem. Well, when you look into it, you discover it is not happening. If any one of you has moderate or great wealth and have decided not to pitch in with saving the rainforest because you think a lot of people are working in that field already, forget it. The number of people waving their arms about it is legion. The number of people who are actually attempting to halt it is countable on the fingers of two hands. The world can be saved. It's simply a matter of diverting, I would say, 5% of GNP to do it. Well, only a terminally psychopathic person would refuse to divert 5% of their energy flow toward their own salvation. If we can't get our act together to do that, I think the calm and cool judgment of Gaia Almighty is, who needed such clowns? I'll hang out with the octopi, the dolphins, the butterflies, and the termite nests. I don't need this headache. I don't need acid rain. I don't need strontium in the environment. I don't need extraction of petroleum products and tons of junk in orbit in order to foster what? Shakespeare? There hasn't been a Shakespeare for 500 years. These clowns aren't producing anything. H-bombs don't make it in the Gaian scale of values. So the point here is tremendously perverse misdirection of resources, a tremendous patience with institutions that have proven that they are either ineffective or actually the enemy. Just in closing, the catalyst now is a combination of technologies, solid-state technologies, and pharmacology. The world that we are leaving behind, the world that failed us, was a world of ideologies and mechanical technologies. And the ideologies, one by one, are going down the tubes. Marxism, Freudianism, fascism, they one by one will be discredited. They cannot sustain. And the mechanical technologies cannot be sustained. They pollute, they dehumanize, they wreck the planet. What is coming into place is a world where drugs replace ideology. That's why drugs are so terrifying to those who oppose them. That's why they say you want to escape. You want to take drugs to escape. That's right. You want to escape. You want to escape fascism, communism, socialism, existentialism, phenomenology, positivism, all of this stuff. You want to escape ideology into the felt presence of the body, which means drugs and sex and syncopated music. And
what is being fought over is how weird people shall be allowed to be. And I think people should be as weird as they possibly can be. It seems the only reasonable stance to take. If we're not as weird as we possibly can be, then we're probably buying into somebody else's cultural game.
Think of the universe as like a war between habit and novelty. That's the great dualism. Habit, it means repetition of pattern, momentum, entropy, that's habit. And novelty means symmetry breaking, new connections, and advance into the future. And so this ebb and flow of novelty versus habit is the real story of how the universe works, but science has not even talked about it. And what we really need is an entirely new view of what time is. The view of time that we're operating with is the view that time is like a perfectly smooth surface. Every moment is potentially like every other moment. If you're measuring the charge of the electron, it doesn't matter whether you do it on a Tuesday or a Sunday, because time is assumed to be an absolute, perfect, featureless plane. But when you look at nature, nothing has this mathematical perfection. Everything is modified by factors. So why not think of time as an irregular surface, the ebb and flow, two different kind of forces that create then the kind of experience of the world that we're having, where there's gain and loss, novelty and habit, years of boredom, sudden surprises, everything ruled by the unexpected. Science builds beautiful models, but they don't come anywhere near to the felt experience of our lives. That's the thing. I mean, it's one thing to be able to predict the path of an artillery shell or an electron, but what we want to understand is, how do affairs work? How do empires fall? How do people fall in love? These kinds of things, the things that actually make up our own world of experience.
My God, nature is alive. It's talking to us. It's alive. No, this is not a metaphor. I am not a romantic. This is not an artistic or aesthetic stance. Nature is alive. Someone is on the line.
Imagine for a moment that anything was possible. Imagine, for example, that the laws of physics were suddenly replaced with the laws of the imagination. Well, that's a very interesting meditation, because it starts out, at least for me, I think, well, if I could have anything, what would I have? Or what would I like to have if I could have anything? So it begins modestly. I would somehow transfer the Vatican Library to Versailles, and I would live at Versailles and have access to the Vatican Library and all other books and works of art that have ever existed, and I would walk in a garden. But then I start thinking like this, and I say, no, but the question was, what would it be like if it could be anything? Why would you want Versailles? Why would you want the Vatican Library if you could have anything? And you realize our imagination is completely constrained by the laws of physics. What would we become if we could become anything? I mean, if I could snap my fingers and you were omnipotent, what would you do? The first thing I would do is I would fly. I would just leap about 300,000 feet in the air and give the cowboy yell. But then you would realize, the entire universe is now your bubble. You can cross the galaxy in the wink of an eye. You can journey back to the Big Bang in the time it takes to think about it. There is no civilization in the history of the cosmos, no work of art, no ecstasy, no experience that is denied you. And I maintain that we would become, within minutes of this transformation, unrecognizable to ourselves, because we are completely defined by our limitations. And so that's what I imagine death is. It's the discovery that you can be, do, see, think, and feel anything.
No, I don't think the shaman fears the end, because the fearfulness of the end is its unknowability. What is death? What is the end of history? As long as you don't know, these things become a screen for the projection of your inner doubts and fears. Once you know, then it's possible to return to ordinary life and live it to the fullest. This is why shamans are often people who have survived some incredible ordeal or disease or psychedelic experience. So it's a shift in perspective, and it's a way of relating to the felt presence of the moment. This is very important. A shaman lives in the moment in a way that we, who are the inheritors of Western civilization, phonetic alphabets, and print culture, can't even imagine, because our whole lives are based on such thoughts as, I'll be happy when I'll feel better when it's always projected into the future. The shaman is somehow able to take the good and the bad together and come out of that encounter with a feeling of optimism and wholeness. I think what's being missed is that the whole dimension of communication is being ruled inadmissible as evidence simply because it doesn't conform to the epistemological biases of the people who are asking the question. And that is all these voices in the head that guide shaman, that obsess lunatics, that make poetry. And in other words, the muse is real. I mean, if you have not experienced the muse, that doesn't mean anything. You may not have climbed Mount Everest either. But I tell you, out there in life, there are experiences which cause a need for new definitions. And
everyone has had them, whether they're willing to admit it. I think of one sort or another.
An intimation of
Yes.
the other.
Uh-huh.
Well, so imagine a compound which elicits this when you choose to use it. Well, one could talk endlessly about this subject, I suppose, but until it's resolved, all of man's epistemological dealings with reality will be haunted by this faint spookiness which can't be gotten rid of.
In one of your previous talks, in the context of establishing your scientific credentials, you said you were always suspicious of anybody who was channeling who wasn't under the influence of a plant. I noticed that you're appearing on Labor Day weekend with at least 2 people on the list who are trans channels, one of whom I know well, and I was curious if you'd elaborate on your resistance to the notion that people can channel entities without channeling plant intelligence.
Okay. Well, I think you gave a milder version of what I said. I think what I said was if someone is channeling without using drugs, they are probably mentally ill. But I said that quite a few years ago, and then it kind of went against me, and I felt like I'd really stepped on a lot of nice people's toes. Although the sentiment remains basically the same. I'm just very... I only believe in the weirdness that I've actually encountered. Channeling is interesting. There's a variety. The spectrum of human consciousness is very broad, and especially when you move from one language or cultural value system to another. I'm thinking of like trance dance in Bali or possession dance in the Middle East, and how these things seem to be, glossolalia is another example, how they seem to be so much a part of the linguistic structure of what is happening. It comes from within. There are all kinds of ways to cut that cake. Language is what actually makes reality. It is coming out of us. The world is not made of atoms or electromagnetic waves. It's made of nets of language that are somehow suspended in and expressed through the neural networks of thinking brains. This is why the world is really a kind of product of awareness. It's a kind of cobweb of attention that comes into being and ebbs and flows according to the clarity of the witnessing mind. And the importance of psychedelics in this, just to sum up here, is that they are catalysts of language. They are enzymes of the social imagination. They speed up the process of melting down and recasting social and intellectual forms and models so that we can advance deeper and deeper into the constructions of our imagination, driven by the faith that the human imagination opens on to ultimately to a dimension of human goodness, that within this hall of mirrors that is our own historical reflection, we are pursuing a pearl of great price, a totality, an integration, a relationship to self and world that is appropriate, that comes out of nature, that feeds back into nature, that nourishes the future, and that respects the past. It's simply a matter of coming into that relationship with that which is already there. And that's the end of the evening. Thank you very much. We'll hope to see you all again sometime downstream.
Through avenues of palm I walked arm in arm with Hafiz and heard the hours flow singing through the channels of his matchless poetry. In gay kiosks I quaffed my sherbet, and in the luxury of lawlessness kissed away by drops that other juice which is contraband unto the faithful. And now beneath citron shadows I laid me down to sleep. When I awoke, it was morning, actually morning, and not a hashish hallucination. The first emotion that I felt upon opening my eyes was happiness to find things again wearing a natural air. Yes, although the last experience of which I had been conscious had seemed to satisfy every human want, physical or spiritual, I smiled on the 4 plain white walls of my bedchamber and hailed their familiar unostentatiousness with a pleasure which had no wish to transfer itself to arabesque or rainbows. It was like returning home from an eternity spent in loneliness among the palaces of strangers. Well may I say an eternity, for during the whole day I could not rid myself of the feeling that I was separated from the preceding one by an immeasurable lapse of time. In fact, I never wholly got rid of it. I rose that I might test my reinstated powers and see if the restoration was complete. Yes, I felt not one trace of bodily weariness nor mental depression. Every function had returned to its normal state with the one exception mentioned. Memory could not efface the traces of my having passed through a great mystery. I recalled the events of the past night and was pleased to think that I had betrayed myself to no one but Dr. H. I was satisfied with my experiment. Ah, would that I had been satisfied. Yet history must go on.
If something is to be done, you want to be damn sure you do the right thing.